Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be reading from the r/no sleep subreddit. So let's jump into it. I woke up with blood on my hands. This happened around 5 years ago when I was in college. We had a big project due at the end of the week, and I decided to pull an all-nighter to finish it up. Around 3 a.m., my friend Mark jokingly said he wanted to see someone get run over by a car. I paid my bill and headed home. I live about 30 minutes away from the diner. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined myself covered in blood and cuts. They cleaned and bandaged my palms and told me to rest for a few days. She was very concerned about me and wanted to make sure I was okay. As I washed my hands under the water, I noticed small pebbles stuck between my fingers. I picked one up and looked at it closely. I asked the doctor if I could have been scratched while sleeping, and he said that it was unlikely but not impossible. I decided not to pursue the investigation any further because I was tired of feeling helpless and hopeless. I was also worried about the financial burden that medical care would put on my family. It was a small, smooth, gray-colored stone. But the experience left me shaken. I still can't sleep without my lights on, and I avoid looking at myself in mirrors. This would have made the ending more satisfying, and it would have shown that the protagonist is a more proactive and less passive character. To this day, I have no idea what kind of animal could have scratched me so badly and why. The reader is left wondering what really happened to the man and whether or not the protagonist is in danger. The ambiguous ending also adds to the story's creepiness, because it leaves the reader with more questions than answers. If you want to hear more stories from the r/no sleep subreddit, check out the playlist in the description. I'll see you next time. It shows that he's a caring person who isn't okay with hurting others, even if it's just a joke. It could have been better if the protagonist had been more proactive, and if the ending had been more satisfying. But as it is, it's still a decent read, and it's definitely worth checking out. This is relevant later on when Mark accuses the protagonist of killing the man. I also feel guilty that I didn't do more to help the man I saw get hit by the car. I didn't recognize it, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have either, because I live in a big city and have no access to nature. First of all, I love the setup and the build-up to this story. The protagonist studying for his final exams and pulling an all-nighter to cram is something that a lot of people can relate to. For example, the protagonist describes the sound of screeching tires and a loud thump, which creates a sense of tension and suspense. The author also uses the protagonist's phone flashlight to create a sense of vulnerability and fear. When the protagonist finally sees the blood on his hands, the reader feels the same sense of shock and fear that the protagonist is experiencing. And it was nice to see that the author chose to start the story in such a relatable way. The transition to Mark suggesting to watch someone get hit by a car is also done well, and it makes sense in the context of the story. It shows that Mark is immature, and that he's not thinking straight because he's tired and has been studying for a long time. This is foreshadowing that Mark might not be telling the truth later on. I showed it to my aunt, and she told me to ask the doctor about it next time I saw them. My cousin took care of me for the next week, until I could move around comfortably. I explained everything to the doctor, and he ordered more tests. After examining my wound, he told me that I had superficial lacerations on both of my palms, which explained the bleeding. But he still didn't know how I got hurt. He took pictures of my wounds and sent them to a specialist. A few days later, the specialist told me that my wounds were consistent with being scratched by a wild animal, specifically a monkey. He told me that monkeys are known to carry diseases that can cause wounds to bleed profusely, and that it was possible that I contracted one of those diseases. He prescribed antibiotics and pain medication and told me to follow up in a few weeks. During that time, I couldn't sleep without waking up in a cold sweat. And whenever I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt sick to my stomach. I had never seen blood up close before, let alone that much of it. I couldn't take it anymore and went to the bathroom to stare at myself in the mirror. As I was splashing water on my face, I felt something wet trickle down my arm. I turned around and saw blood pouring out of the bathroom sink. I panicked and screamed for my cousin. He came in and looked at me in the sink, then told me to keep quiet and get in his car. He drove me to the emergency room at the nearest hospital. I have to walk to my bus stop and then take 2 buses to get home. The walk to the bus stop is through a dark, narrow alley. I didn't bring a flashlight, so I pulled out my cell phone to light the way. When I got to the end of the alley and stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a dark stain on my hands. I assumed it was dirt or grease, so I tried wiping it off on my jeans. It wouldn't come up. That's when I turned my phone's flashlight on my hand and saw blood. I started freaking out because I don't remember getting cut. I ran to the nearest convenience store and used their bathroom to look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't see any wounds on my hands or arms, but there was blood all over my fingers and dripping down my palm. I washed my hands, hoping to wash the blood away, but it didn't help. I was too scared to go home without knowing what happened, so I called my cousin who lived nearby and asked if I could stay at his place for the night. Luckily, he didn't ask any questions and agreed to pick me up. I told him to stop being an idiot because the road is busy at this hour and then went back to studying. About 20 minutes later, we heard screeching tires and a loud thump. We looked outside and saw a man lying in the street and a car speeding away. I told Mark that this wasn't funny anymore and he should apologize. He just kept laughing and said he was sorry, but he didn't mean it. I just shook my head and went back to studying. It wasn't that big of a deal. All of my classmates did it, and we would always meet up in our favorite all-night diner during these sessions. The food is mediocre, but the coffee is strong, and they're open 24 hours. This particular night was pretty uneventful. We studied for a few hours, and then took a break to order some coffee and donuts. Mark left around 5 a.m., and I stayed another hour until my food and coffee gave me heartburn. At his house, I washed my hands again and tried to sleep on the couch. The doctors were puzzled by my injury. I couldn't tell them how I got hurt because I didn't know. One morning, my aunt accompanied me to the bathroom to watch me take a shower. The next day, my cousin drove me back to the hospital. But that still doesn't answer the question of how I was scratched. As the weeks passed, my wounds healed, and I went back to school. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. The scene where Mark jokingly suggests watching someone get hit by a car is also an important character-building moment for the protagonist. Another thing I like about this story is the use of sensory details to create a creepy atmosphere. However, I think the story could have been better if the protagonist had actually investigated how he got blood on his hands instead of just assuming that he killed the man. That being said, the story is still effective in creating a sense of unease and dread. Overall, I think this is a good story with a creepy atmosphere and a thought-provoking concept. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe.